The notary looked at the document, looked up at my mother-in-law, looked back down, and said, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you say something when you already know it's going to change everything. Mrs. Hargrove, your son's middle name only has one L. Pat froze, and I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do in 23 years. It went completely blank, like someone had pulled a plug. Okay, back up, because you need to understand who these people are before any of this makes sense. My name is Diane. I'm 54. I teach 10th grade English in a mid-sized town in western Pennsylvania, which means I spend my days explaining symbolism to teenagers who would rather be anywhere else, and I genuinely love it. I'm the person who cries at the end of To Kill a Mockingbird every single year in front of 30 15-year-olds without apology. Rob used to say that was his favorite thing about me, that I couldn't perform indifference even when I tried. Robert Hargrove. God, where do you even start with someone like Rob? He was a civil engineer. He had a spreadsheet for the grocery list. He kept a legal pad on his nightstand and wrote down things he wanted to remember. Not important things, just things. A documentary he wanted to watch. A joke he'd heard that he wanted to tell his brother. The name of the tree in our neighbor's yard that he'd been trying to identify for 3 years. Pin oak, he finally wrote, the November before he got sick. Circled it twice. I still have that legal pad. We met when I was 28. He was 30. It was at a work happy hour I almost didn't go to, for a company I left 6 months later, and I have thought many times about the version of my life where I stayed home that night. We got married 2 years later. Eli came, then Sophie. We bought a house in a neighborhood with a good elementary school and a coffee shop we could walk to, and for 23 years we built something that I can only describe as ordinary, in the way that a thing can be ordinary and also be, without question, the best thing you ever had. Then there was Pat, Patricia Ann Hargrove, née Calloway, 71 years old, belonged to the garden club, made a lemon pound cake that won a blue ribbon at the county fair in 2009, and mentioned it approximately once a month for the following decade. She had Rob when she was 23, and she had never, not for a single day of his adult life, fully accepted that he'd grown up. I don't think she was a monster. I want to say that up front. I think she was a woman who'd built her entire identity around one person, and when that person grew up and fell in love with someone else, she never figured out who to be instead. But not being a monster doesn't mean not doing monstrous things. She started on me early. Nothing I could ever call her out on directly. It was always just slightly below the surface. First Christmas I spent with Rob's family, she pulled out the photo albums, which, fine, sweet, totally normal, but she'd somehow arranged it so that every photo she landed on was Rob with a previous girlfriend. Not making a point about it, just lingering. Oh, this is from Hilton Head. That's the summer he dated Carolyn. She was a sweetheart. Pause. Pre-med. Rob, oblivious, looking at the photo. I forgot about that trip. Me, smiling so hard my face hurt. When Rob and I got engaged, Pat called him, not me, him, to express her concerns. He told me about it that night, trying to frame it gently. She just said she wants to make sure I'm not rushing. We've been together 2 years, I said. I know. We're in our 30s. I know. Rob. She'll come around. He took my hand. She always does. He was right that she came around. He was wrong about what around meant. To Pat, coming around just meant finding a quieter angle. Rob's dad, Frank, died in 2019. Heart attack, fast, which was somehow both devastating and, as Rob said, very dad. He would have hated a long goodbye. Frank left behind about $180,000, split evenly between Rob and his brother Kevin. Rob used his share to pay off the last of our mortgage and put the rest in a 529 for the kids. Practical, methodical. Exactly the decision you'd expect from a man with a legal pad on his nightstand. Pat lost her mind. Not publicly, never publicly. but in that particular private register she had, the one that operated just below the volume of a thing you could confront. She called Rob and told him the money should have stayed in the family, should have been invested properly, that she just wanted to make sure we weren't being irresponsible. "What does that mean, irresponsible?" I asked him after. He was quiet for a second. "I think it means she wanted input on it. It's your inheritance." "I know. From your father." "Diane." He looked at me steadily. "I know. I'm not going to argue with her. I'm just telling you what she said. What I understand now, that I didn't fully understand then, is that the money was never really about the money. It was about control. It was about Pat needing to remain essential. And when Rob made a decision with his inheritance without consulting her, with my input instead, she filed it away somewhere. She had very organized filing systems, Pat. Then Rob got sick. October 2021. He'd been tired for a few months, losing weight, and the explanation kept changing. Stress, a stomach thing, maybe a food intolerance we hadn't identified. He was the kind of person who didn't want to make a fuss, so he kept rescheduling the follow-up appointments. Then one Tuesday, he called me from the parking lot of the clinic, and his voice was different. Not upset exactly, just different, like something behind it had gone very still. "They found a mass," he said, "on the pancreas." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't know why. My legs just went. "Okay," I said. "Okay, come home. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3, which the oncologist explained with a chart and a gentleness that somehow made it worse. 8 months, give or take. Maybe more with treatment, maybe less." We told the kids that weekend. We told my parents. We told Kevin, who flew in from Denver and spent 3 days just being there, which was exactly right. Kevin and I had always gotten along, quietly and without effort, the way you get along with someone when you're both just trying to love the same person well. We told Pat last. Rob called her himself. I heard her voice through the phone from across the room. That sound. I can't describe it except to say that whatever else Pat was, she loved her son, and that sound was real. That grief was real. For a little while, it was enough to reset something between us. The problem with grief is that it doesn't purify people. I think we want to believe it does, that when something terrible enough happens, everyone rises to their best self. But grief is more like pressure. It just reveals what was already there. What was already in Pat was the need to win. She started coming over more, which I welcomed because Rob wanted her there, and he was the only thing that mattered. She'd sit with him in the afternoons, bring him food he probably wouldn't eat, and I'd give them space because he needed his mother, and she was losing her son, and I had enough room in my heart for all of that. What I didn't have was eyes in the back of my head. Later, I learned what she was saying during those afternoons. I learned it in pieces, from Rob himself, in the confused, half-conversations he'd have in his last weeks when the medications made it hard to track what was real. He'd say things that didn't connect to anything I knew. "Did you talk to a different lawyer?" he asked me once, out of nowhere. "What? No. Why?" He frowned. "I thought—" Someone said. He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind, I'm tired. Another time. You know I trust you with the house, right? Whatever Mom says." I went cold. "What does Mom say?" But he was already drifting. I didn't push. He was dying. I was not going to spend his remaining energy on Pat. What I pieced together afterward, from things Kevin told me, from things Rob had apparently said to him. Pat had been telling Rob, during those afternoon visits, that I was pulling away, that I'd been talking to a lawyer he didn't know about, that I'd been complaining about the house being too much to manage, that she'd heard things. She planted seeds, carefully, consistently, in a garden she knew would never have time to dispute her. Rob died March 8th. It was a Tuesday. He would have appreciated that. Tuesdays were his favorite, for reasons he could never quite explain. "Tuesdays are just quietly reliable," he used to say. "Nobody expects anything from a Tuesday, so it never disappoints. He was unconscious for the last 2 days. We took shifts. I held his hand and talked to him, which the hospice nurse said he could probably still hear, so I told him things. Small things. I told him about the pin oak in the neighbor's yard. I told him Eli had gotten a B+ on his midterm. I told him the coffee shop down the street had finally fixed their espresso machine. I told him I was going to be okay. Sophie was on his right side when he went. She was the one who noticed. She looked up at me and said, very quietly, "Mom." That's all. Just Mom. I knew. 3 weeks after the funeral, Gerald Foss called. Gerald had been our family's attorney since before the kids were born. He's the kind of man who wears the same style of glasses he's worn since 1987 and sees absolutely no reason to change. He does not use dramatic pauses or build to things. He just says them. "Diane, can you come in Thursday? Someone has submitted a document to probate court claiming to be Rob's final will. It's not the one we prepared." I sat with that for a second. "Okay," I said. "It would supersede the existing will if accepted." "Okay, Gerald, who submitted it?" A pause, just a short one. "Patricia Hargrove." Thursday came. I sat across from Gerald's desk, and he laid 2 documents side by side like he was presenting evidence, which, it turned out, he was. The real will, the one Rob and I had prepared together, that I'd sat in on, that Gerald had notarized himself, on the left. The submitted document on the right. I picked it up, read it. The house, to Patricia. The primary accounts, to Patricia. To me, a cash sum, the same amount Rob had designated for her. My hands were steady. Isn't that strange? I've thought about it since, why I was so calm in that moment. I think part of me had been waiting for something like this without knowing I was waiting, like my body had known before my brain caught up. "Gerald," I said, "what's wrong with it?" And he almost smiled, just slightly, the way a man smiles when 31 years of notary work turns out to matter enormously. "His middle name," he said, "is spelled E-L-I-S, 1 L. On this document, it's E-L-L-I-S, 2 L's. He let that sit. "You don't misspell your own name," he said. "Not your middle name. Not at 60 years old. Not on a legal document." I looked at the signature. It was close. I'll give her that. It was genuinely close. She'd practiced. She'd studied him. But she'd never had to spell his middle name herself. She'd only heard it. And when she wrote it down, she wrote what it sounded like instead of what it was. Ellis. 2 L's. 1 letter. 23 years of scheming, and she tripped on 1 letter in a name she'd heard 1,000 times and never once written down. Gerald had already flagged it, already called a forensic examiner, already begun the process of protecting what Rob had actually wanted. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time. I kept thinking about those afternoon visits. Her sitting beside him, holding his hand, planting those little seeds of doubt, while carrying this plan inside her, while knowing what she intended to do the moment he was gone. She was planning it while he was still alive. She held his hand while planning to steal from his children. That was the thing that broke something open in me, finally. Not the forgery, not the fraud. That. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The forensic document examiner Gerald used, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, which I found darkly funny under the circumstances, 2 Patricias, found the problems within a day. The ink pressure was wrong. Rob had a slight leftward slant from years of drafting work. The forged signature was even. The paper had been treated with a diluted tea solution to simulate aging. She'd found the same technique in 3 other forgery cases in the past decade. Dr. Osei said, on the stand later, that it was competent but not professional, which meant Pat had done her research, but she wasn't a criminal. She was a 71-year-old woman from the Garden Club who'd watched too many true crime documentaries and overestimated herself. Then they found her computer. I wasn't there when the investigators went through it, but Kevin told me later. Kevin, who by this point was barely speaking to his mother, what they'd found. Search history. How to replicate someone's signature. Can forged will be detected. Aged paper technique ink. What happens if will forgery discovered? She'd searched that last one in January, 2 months before Rob died. She was planning the exit strategy before he was gone. I've tried to understand it. I've sat with it for a long time. And what I keep coming back to is that Pat had probably told herself some version of a story where this was reasonable, where Rob's real wishes were being distorted by my influence, and she was just correcting it, where she was protecting her son's legacy. People who do terrible things almost never think of themselves as the villain. They have a narrative. She had a narrative. It didn't make it less criminal. She was charged with will fraud, forgery, and filing a false legal document. She hired a defense attorney I recognized from local news coverage of an unrelated case. Competent, expensive, the kind that signals, "We are taking this seriously." She pled guilty 8 months later. I was in the courtroom. I didn't have to be. Gerald told me it would be straightforward, that I could just wait for the call. But I wanted to be there. Not for revenge. I'd given up on the idea of satisfying revenge months earlier. I just wanted to see it. She walked in with her attorney, and she looked smaller than I remembered. Not frail exactly. Pat had never been frail a day in her life, but reduced somehow. Like something that had been holding her upright was gone. She didn't look at me. She pled guilty to the reduced charges, received 3 years probation, a fine, court costs, no prison time. Her attorney talked about age, about grief, about a woman who had made a terrible decision during an unimaginable loss. I sat very still through all of it. Outside the courthouse afterward, Kevin found me. He'd come from Denver again. He looked exhausted in a way that was different from grief, more like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. He said, "I'm sorry, Diane. I'm so sorry for all of it." I said, "It's not yours to apologize for." "I know. I'm apologizing anyway." We stood in the parking lot for a while, not saying much, just two people who both loved Rob and had both lost him twice now. Sophie started college in September. Eli drove down from his apartment to help us move her in, and the three of us spent a Saturday carrying boxes up 4 flights of stairs while Sophie micromanaged the placement of everything, and Eli pretended to be more exhausted than he was to make her laugh. At one point, taking a break in the parking lot, Eli said, "Dad would have cried carrying that first box." Sophie, "Before we even got to the elevator." Me, "He absolutely would have." We all laughed, the kind of laughing that's right next to crying, where you can feel both things simultaneously, and somehow that's okay. I drove home alone. The car still smells like the air freshener Rob bought in bulk from Costco. This particular pine scent I used to tease him about, and now I buy it myself and don't tell anyone. The house is quiet. The pin oak in the neighbor's yard is going orange now, and I know what it's called, and I eat breakfast looking at it sometimes, and talk to Rob a little, inside my head, nothing dramatic, just updates, things I want him to know. Eli's good. Sophie's good. The coffee shop fixed the espresso machine again. It broke again in July, fixed again in August. It's a whole thing. I still teach 10th grade English. Last spring, a girl in second period, skeptical, eye-rolling, the kind of kid who needs you to earn it, stayed after class and said, quietly, so no one else could hear, "The part where Atticus says real courage is knowing your beat before you start, but finishing anyway. Did that actually help you? Like, for real stuff?" I looked at her for a second. "Yeah," I said, "for real stuff." She nodded, like that confirmed something, grabbed her bag and left. I thought about Pat on the drive home, about the computer searches. What happens if will forgery discovered? About the 2L Ellis, about the lemon pound cake and the photo albums, and 23 years of quiet, patient positioning, and then the moment it all came apart over a single letter in a name she'd heard but never written. She lost her son. Then she lost what remained of him. She lost Kevin, mostly. She lost her standing in the community she'd spent decades cultivating. She lost the version of herself she'd been presenting to the world. She is still alive. I don't know what her days are like. I don't let myself wonder too much. I did not forgive her. I don't believe I'm required to, and I'm suspicious of anyone who tells a person in my position that forgiveness is the destination. Sometimes the destination is just moving forward, keeping what's yours, building something true out of what's left. That's where I am. That's enough. Before you close this video, I want to ask you something. Not about Pat, not about forgery or karma or any of it. I want to ask you about the legal pad. Rob kept it on his nightstand because he didn't want to forget things. Small things. The kind of things that don't make it into eulogies or estate documents. A documentary. A joke. The name of a tree. The things that made him him. Pat spent years trying to control what Rob's life meant. She spent his final months trying to control what it left behind. And none of it, not one single strategy, could touch the legal pad. The pin oak. The way he laughed at his own jokes before the punchline. You can forge a signature. You can age paper. You can plant doubt in a dying man's mind. But you can't forge 23 years of a person. You can't replicate the real thing. And neither, in the end, could she. The truth survives. Not always on a timeline we choose, but it survives. Hold on to the legal pads in your life, the small, unforged, irreplaceable things. They matter more than anyone trying to take something from you will ever understand.